time for the summer reading program. This is Eagle News on KWSO. Here's today's story.
Hello, my name is Laura, and I work at the Jefferson County Library. I love magical stories. Today, we will meet a little girl who learns to knit with a magical box of yarn. Knitting is taking yarn or string and using two sticks, or they're called knitting needles, and looping the yarn together to create something like a scarf or a hat or maybe even a sweater. Well, let's get started. This is called Extra Yarn by Barnett. On a cold afternoon, in a cold little town, where everywhere you looked was either white of snow or black of soot from the chimneys, Annabelle found a box filled with yarn of every color. So she went home and knit herself a sweater. And when Annabelle was done, she had some extra yarn. So she knit a sweater for her dog, Mars, too. But there was still extra yarn. And when Annabelle and Mars went for a walk, Nate pointed and laughed and said, "You two look ridiculous." "You're just jealous," said Annabelle. "No, I'm not," said Nate. But it turned out he was. And even after she made a sweater for Nate and his dog, and herself, and for Mars, she still had extra yarn. At school, Annabelle's classmates could not stop talking about her sweater. "Quiet," shouted Mr. Norman. "Quiet, everyone. Annabelle, that sweater of yours is a terrible distraction. I cannot teach with everyone turning around and looking at you." "Then I'll knit one for everyone," Annabelle said, "so they won't have to turn around." "Impossible," said Mr. Norman. "You can't." But it turned out she could, and she did. Even for Mr. Norman. And when she was done, Annabelle still had extra yarn. So she knit sweaters for her mom and her dad, and for Mr. and Mrs. Pendleton, and for Dr. Palmer, and for little Lewis. She made sweaters for everyone except Mr. Crabtree, who never wore sweaters or even long pants, and who always would stand in his shorts with the snow up to his knees. "No sweater for me, thanks, Annabelle," said Mr. Crabtree. So she made Mr. Crabtree a hat. And even then, Annabelle still had extra yarn. She made sweaters for all the dogs and all the cats, and for other animals too. Soon people thought, soon Annabelle will run out of yarn. But it turned out she didn't. So Annabelle made sweaters for things that didn't even need sweaters, like houses and trees. Things began to change in that little town. Wow, imagine that. One little girl took a gift and learned how to knit. Annabelle then took that skill of knitting she had learned and shared her knitted clothing with people in her town. Things began to change in her town. But why? Do you think it was because she was being kind to others? Let's find out what Annabelle will do with her magical box of yarn tomorrow. Until then, let your imagination soar and read.
We hope you enjoyed today's story, the summer reading program on Eagle News. Remember, let your imagination soar. Read. Thank you for listening to 91.9 FM, KWSO.